Hi, my name is Chelsea, and today I am doing the job interview for the unit manager position. So I did record my questions and then I will respond to them as if I'm really in an interview. What is your leadership style? Can you give a few examples of this in action? So I have definitely learned that I have an accommodating style. I know sometimes that can be viewed as kind of passive aggressive sometimes because you feel like you have to take on this role. But for me, the way I view it is leading by example. It's something that I definitely appreciate, and I have seen working as an LVN. There was actually once a director when I was I think it was my first Kaiser job, it was for the flu clinic, and I was just so inspired by this director because she had the medical background, she had her BSN, but she was also the director. And when we were doing the flu clinic, I didn't know how to give injections at that time to babies. So what she did, because there was only two other nurses that were able to do it, and I think we saw like 500 people that day, what she did is she said, Chelsea, do you feel comfortable giving the injections? I said I would if I knew how, but I've never given one. So what she did is for, I wanna say maybe 2 or 3 patients, she says, I'm gonna show you how to do it. She went in there, she showed me how to do it, and from then on, I was able to give all ages injections. So I feel like having that accommodating leadership style is really beneficial because, especially if you've worked in the position that your employees have, there's definitely a different level of respect. And then another leadership style I think that I really appreciate and I have is being collaborative. I think it's super important to be able to communicate efficiently with your staff or colleagues and get feedback. Even if you think it's negative feedback, all feedback is good feedback, in my opinion. Tell me a time when you faced conflict or disagreed with a coworker or leader. That's a good question. Um, there's always going to be conflict or disagreements in any job. And I think the important thing is to create a space where, or environment rather, where everybody feels like they can speak up. I think the last thing that any manager would want is for things not to be addressed because people or employees are not feeling like I'm approachable, because that's not how we solve problems. I think in order to effectively problem solve, there has to be a good line of communication, and it starts with creating an environment where people feel like they can approach me so that we can tackle the concerns or issues together. Tell me a time when you were faced with a problem and successfully solved it. So, one example that I can actually give at my current job right now is there's specific workflows, and again, it's in any job, but pertaining to this job specifically, things were not getting done. And as nurses, it's very important to make sure for this department that the patient's charts are appropriately screened. So we have a screening process, which most of the LVNs know needs to be done, because if it's not done, then we wouldn't be able to move forward with the procedure for the patient. And the reason why we have this screening is because we want to make sure that it's safe, number one, of course, for the patient to go ahead and get the procedure done. And ultimately, what was happening is the screening wasn't getting done and it delayed care for the patients. So, what I did, just to hold staff accountable as well is I brought it up to management because I feel like it's not my duty necessarily as a fellow colleague to tell my equals how to do their job. So I brought the concern up to my manager and I explained to them that there should be some sort of standard or expectation set in place since we don't have a job aid for the LVNs. So she told me to send over my workflow and I sent it over, and she actually made the job aid official. So now there's a standard set in place so that the LVNs know what they have to do when they come in for the shift. That way we don't have to turn down patients. Time is everything, and we definitely need to be considerate and respectful of that of our patients, because it is our duty to make sure that the screening process is done. It's not the patient's responsibility. So we were able to move forward and it was successful. Tell me a time you faced a staffing shortage, either from a leadership or employee situation. What were your actions related to being understaffed? So I have definitely experienced that. Usually the staffing shortage primarily, leadership definitely does play a huge role in it, because if we're constantly short and if somebody is on a medical leave, for example, or, maybe quits, that means that we're one or two men down. So I feel like it can be a very stressful situation for sure, because you have to pick up the slack of that coworker who is missing. I've also dealt with not having a manager, which is really, really actually challenging too. As much as, people probably don't talk about it as much, it's still very important to have somebody in leadership so that there's structure and there's rules, guidelines, protocols, where they're circling back with the staff. Because yes, the staff is working on the floor, but you still need leadership in order to have, successful operational needs. So it definitely hurt the staff not having a manager when we were going through that, and it was just kind of up to the staff to pull things together and do the best that we can and still provide quality care. We were lucky and blessed enough to have leaders or leadership management step in from other departments to kind of cover while they tried to find another manager. So, what is your strategy to retain employees and maintain morale on the unit? It's a good question. I've seen such high turnover in my current position, and probably in my last few departments. I want to say my last department and this department specifically, I've actually seen a lot of turnovers. And I want to use this as an example because I think it draws back to what I mentioned earlier. I think there needs to be a strong line of communication. It's super important to establish that and to also ensure that your employees feel heard. In the department that I work in, a lot of managers have left because it was too much work, or they felt actually like they weren't valued from their superiors. And I know that with some of them not circling back with us, it makes us, the staff or employees, feel like we're not being heard. And even if you sit there and take the time to listen, that's one thing, but there also has to be action behind the words. So besides communication, I think it's super important to make sure that not only are you circling back and following up, but actually putting action behind it and showing that there are changes being made, especially if it's a decent amount of your staff complaining about the same things. Like I said, I'm definitely somebody that has experienced both sides of it, whether it's losing leadership or losing fellow coworkers. So to me, it's very important to keep a very collaborative style and leading by example to keep your employees happy. I feel like when your employees are happy, you can't please everybody. We don't live in a perfect world, unfortunately, but as long as you work towards the greater goal of the majority of the staff, and as long as it's safe, I feel like that's the best way to retain staff. How do you offer feedback to employees? Give an example of how you embrace cultural differences. Oops, went ahead of myself there. So, offering feedback is definitely not easy. I think it comes with experience and how you approach things. I am definitely a believer in tonality and the words that you use, and just being mindful of how you want to deliver that message. Sometimes, depending on personalities, people can perceive things differently. But I think as long as you're being sincere and professional, it's okay to give feedback so that the person that you're giving the feedback to feels confident and comfortable. I think the goal of giving feedback should never be discouraging, it should be encouraging. So I know we were kind of moving into another question here about how do you embrace cultural differences and diversity. Let me just finish that question up. And diversity in your team. So embracing cultural differences and diversity, I would say I've never really worked with colleagues where we didn't embrace one another's cultural differences. In nursing and in healthcare in general, it's very important, and you learn this right off the bat in school too, that you have to have an open mind. Even the way we communicate with patients should be very much like open-ended questions. It's more like, tell me more, without being disrespectful. So I would say the way to do that is, just being open-minded and being respectful of your peers. How would you approach an underperforming employee? I know we've talked a lot about this, but it goes back to communication. I think what goes along with that, though, is making sure that there is a solid foundation of what the expectations are. Because as long as there's rules and regulations in place, that's what you have to go off of. Without rules or structure, then we really don't have anything to follow, and it would just be chaotic. So I think that giving positive feedback, or doing your annual performance reviews, those are super important because there's always something that we can all work on. We're not perfect. So just being positive and encouraging. How would you approach an angry client? This is something that happens on a daily basis. Not everybody's going to be happy, especially our patients. So being an active listener is extremely important. And something that kind of works hand in hand with that too is not personalizing anything. It's important to understand that patients oftentimes are not feeling well. They may be anxious or nervous. You don't know if they're getting the best or the worst news of their lives. Maybe they were stuck in traffic. Maybe something happened to their family member. But if they do get upset, you have to try to be mindful that it's out of frustration and it's not necessarily to you, even though they're taking it out on you. So I think the best way to approach an upset patient or client is to provide active listening, find a solution together. Even if you don't have the answer, tell them, you know what, I don't have the answer to that, but I'll go find one. How do you commit to professional development? So, how do I commit to professional development? I think for me, leading by example, and raising awareness if I do have any concerns is how we can commit to a professional development. Provide an example. What would you do if you were presented with a process improvement project with ambiguous directions? So, if I had to do a process improvement project that was pulling me in different directions, I think we would have to do somewhat of maybe like a survey, and reach out to the staff and see, where their areas of concerns are, narrow it down, and then create goals, and then figure out a way to achieve those goals. Um, I think the best way could even be just sending out a memo and then scheduling a staff meeting. I think that's super important, to again keep that strong line of communication and problem solve together. So I think that wraps up the interview, and yeah, we're all done here. Thank you.